Suppose that we want to define a function f of x, which is 1 if x is greater than 0 and 0 otherwise. Right now we don't know how to do that in Python. What we want then is to get Python to do one thing if a particular condition is true and otherwise do something else. The way that that's done is by using what's called a conditional. And in this video, we're going to investigate the simplest kind of Python conditional, which is an if-else conditional. So let's start in this first code box here. What we're going to do is to write a conditional, which will print the word positive if a variable x is positive, and not positive if it's not positive. So we'll begin by defining our variable, whose name is x, and let's give it the value 1 to begin with. To begin with the conditional, we type the word if, and then the condition we want to test, and then a colon. The condition has to be something with a Boolean value, so true or false. Since we want to check if x is positive, we're going to do if x is greater than 0. After that we have a colon, and then the code that we want to be executed if x is greater than 0 has to be indented by 4 spaces, just like we indented function definitions. You can see that when I press enter, the Jupyter notebook automatically puts the 4 spaces in for me. We wanted to print a message, in this case saying that x was positive, so we'll do that with the print function. Alright, so that is a complete conditional. That is the simplest possible conditional. And you can see what's going to happen when I run this. It'll print out the message x is positive. On the other hand, if I make x equal to 0, then the condition on line 2 will be false and it will not print anything at all. There is the simplest possible conditional, but it doesn't quite do what we wanted yet because it doesn't print any message if x is not positive. Let's see how to do that. So the way to do that is to use the word else. We type else and then a colon, and then indented by 4 spaces on subsequent lines, we tell Python what we want it to do if the first condition was false. So let's make it print not positive. Now we've got our complete if-else conditional. Let's test it out. So we'll begin with x being a positive number. What will happen in this case is that on line 2, Python will check if x is greater than 0. That's true, so Python will execute the indented code on line 3, and so it'll print the message x is positive. It'll then ignore everything else. As you can see, that's what happens. On the other hand, if we make x to be a non-positive number, like 0 or -3, then what will happen when we run it this time is that the condition on line 2 will be false. That means Python will ignore the indented code on line 3, and instead it will execute the indented code following the else clause, and it will print the words x is not positive. Of course, you can have more than one line of indented code if you want Python to do more than one thing if the condition was true or if it was false. So let's recap the simple if-else conditional. The way you write a simple if-else conditional is you begin with the word if, then you type your condition, which has to be something which has a Boolean value, so which is true or false, and then you have to end the line with a colon. After that, you type the code which you want to be executed when that condition was true, indented by 4 spaces. Finally, if you want, you can then have the word else, and then a colon, and then some indented code which will be executed if your original condition was false. Let's use what we've just learned about conditionals to define a function. So we're going to define the function which I mentioned above, which was 1 if its input was greater than 0 and was 0 otherwise. So this is going to be interesting because we're going to use a conditional inside a function definition. So we're going to need 2 levels of indentation to do this. So let's begin with the definition of a function. We have to start with the word def, and then f, and then in brackets the variables to represent the inputs to the function. We just want one input, so I'll call it x. Then we have a colon. Alright, so now we want behavior which depends on the value of x, so we need to start a conditional. So we'll say if x is greater than 0. What do we want to do in that case? Well, before we think about what we're going to do, let's remember what's going to happen here. We need 2 levels of indentation because now we are inside a conditional, inside a function definition. And you can see that the Jupyter Notebook has done that before me. It's added 8 spaces here. So in this case, if x is greater than 0, I want the output to my function to be 1. And we specify the output to a function with the word return. So we can just do return 1. Okay, what next? Now I want to deal with the case where that condition was false, which I do with the else keyword. And when that was false, so when x was not greater than 0, we want our function to return 0. And that's it, there's the complete definition. So let's now test it out. Let's try f of something very positive there. This should be 1. You can see that it is. Let's now try f being 0. This should give us, let's try f of 0. This should give us the output 0, and it does. And let's now try something negative. And again, we get the output 0. So our conditional is working.